Welcome back. This is episode 2 of the Energy Exchange, and I am your host, Asha Dickens. I am the owner of October Lotus, a holistic healing and wellness company. And if you don't remember, the Energy Exchange is a series of conversations that I will be having with my friends, family, and all sorts of cool people about their healing journeys. So today is no different. I am joined by one of my really good friends, Bridget Harris. She is here today to talk to us about her fibroid journey. Bridget is one of my really good friends. We worked together for a number of years and just developed a friendly relationship. And I'm so glad that I'm able to talk to her because she also has a very interesting story, and I'm sure it will resonate with some, but I really hope that it educates others. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Bridget, and please introduce yourself to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. Bridget Harris. I am founder of Orem 79 Beauty. Orem 79 Beauty is a marketplace with Black and Brown owned beauty products. And it was created to basically offer better beauty options because, as you know or may not know, 75% of mainstream beauty products marketed to Black women are considered toxic. And a lot of those toxins are directly related to hormonal challenges. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion today.
Yes.
There's synergy there. And yes, I always call her my cosmic sister because as we were building our friendship, we were like, oh, I did that too. Well, me too. Well, me too.
Right.
But we're like opposites. It's like the same but opposite.
The yin to my yang.
Yes.
Yes. You knew you were probably going to be like guest number 1 or 2.
Yes.
Just because, again, I have fibroids. I also have endometriosis. I also have dermoid ovarian cysts. So it was also something that we connected on when I found out that Bridget had fibroids. I feel like most of the women in my life had fibroids anyway.
Right.
So it wasn't shocking, unfortunately.
Right, unfortunately.
So Bridget, tell us about your fibroid journey. When were you diagnosed? How were you diagnosed? What was the path that they placed you on in order to basically maintain or heal your fibroids? All of those things. Talk about it.
Okay. So back in 2013, and let me preface this with saying, like, my cycle ran like clockwork since I had it. I could plan out what I was doing for my birthday in September in January because that's how regular I was. So summer of 2013, I got my cycle and I bled for 13 days, which was not, I'm a 4-day girl.
4 and 5 days.
4 and 5 days.
Normal. 13 is excessive.
Right. And that was the first time it had ever happened. And so I went to the doctor. I went to my OBGYN, told her what was going on. She put me on birth control pills. I had also never been on birth control. That was literally the first and last time I've ever taken birth control in my life. So she put me on birth control to stop the bleeding so that they could do a more invasive ultrasound to see what was going on. So birth control for a few days. I went back. They did an ultrasound, and she basically said I had a fibroid, one fibroid. It was so small that there was nothing that could be done about it, and that I was fine, and that was that.
Oh.
So that was my introduction. I didn't know what a fibroid was, but because I was told, don't worry about it, there's nothing to be done, I wasn't given like maybe you should change your diet or do this or do that. I was honestly thinking that I didn't even know that they would grow.
Right.
So I'm thinking I have a small fibroid.
And that's it.
And that's what I have. Yeah. And that's what it'll be.
Right.
So I never thought about it again. And it wasn't until 2020, so 7 years later, when I was trying to conceive, that I went back to figure out what was going on with my body. And I was told that I had multiple fibroids from there. And I have one that is the size of an orange.
Yeah.
And I presume that is the one that was there from 2013.
And it just grew.
And got bigger because all the rest of them are smaller. It was basically a 7-year gap. I didn't think about it. And it didn't it didn't bother me.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't bleeding extra. I didn't have abnormal cycles after that one time.
Okay.
I never felt it. I never had pain. I never had bulging. So
there was no reason to think it was anything more than just fibroid. They said, don't worry about it.
Yeah. Somebody told me I had a fibroid back in 2013, and that was the end of it. It wasn't disruptive. It was just there, but apparently growing.
You mentioned that your doctor suggested that you take birth control in order to stop your bleeding. So what you're saying is you were bleeding for 13 days consecutively.
Yep.
You went to the doctor and you had to stop bleeding in order for her to see what was going on. Like if you hadn't done that, you could have gone longer than 13 days. Is that what you're saying?
I think so, because it wasn't easing up. There was no spotting. I was like bleeding every day, like I was on my period.
Oh my goodness.
So, and they couldn't even like go in to see without the bleeding stopping. So
that's fine. Okay. I want to take a step back. You mentioned that for the 7-year period, nothing was going on. When you were trying to conceive in 2020, you realized that the fibroid had grown to the size of an orange, or a new one came and was the size of an orange, whatever the case may be. What led to finding out that you had the fibroid the size of an orange? So if in the 7-year period, everything was normal, everything was fine, how did we get here?
Okay. So I was actively avoiding getting pregnant.
Okay.
For my whole life.
Right.
So the moment that I tried, I was thinking like, okay, it's one and done.
Right.
It's happening.
Easy.
And nothing happened. And so I think we may have tried, maybe like I was still getting my cycles regularly. So I'm tracking ovulation and kind of, home remedies, trying to figure out, okay, when am I ovulating? Okay, today's the day. It was given Charlotte off of Sex and the City very much so.
Crying in the bathroom.
Right, so.
That's not funny. I'm laughing.
Right.
Sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
Right.
But I ended up, after it might have been 3 months of trying. It's like, well, let me go just check to see. So had some blood tests run, had, and I don't know the technical names of all the procedures, but there's one where they put the balloon in your uterus to make sure it's clear of fibroids.
Yeah.
So I had that test done, which determined that there weren't any fibroids inside of my uterus.
Okay.
But that there were other ones around, including in the wall of my uterus. Like a couple in the wall, the big one, and but I was still being told it should be fine. Just keep trying.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember the timeline. So that was maybe early 2020, and I got married in the fall of 2020. But it was one of those well, let's just see what happens. So we're just seeing. And it wasn't until 2021 where it was like, okay, now we're really ready, so let's get into it.
Right.
For real. Let me just say this, as a new entrepreneur, navigating healthcare without an employer, and trying to do something like a fertility journey
is expensive.
It's expensive.
Yeah.
It's time consuming. It's scary because
you don't have that employer insurance to fall back on.
Right.
In so many places, just as an aside, because I found this. Some of my older doctors, or my doctors I had been going to, would say, oh, well, if you're not a part of an employer plan, they can't take XYZ.
Right.
And so even when you have your own insurance, they're still not always willing to take you as a client or a patient.
Yeah.
And these are people who I had been going to.
Right.
Thankfully, I was able to find insurance that the one insurance they finally were able to take. I found it, but
And I didn't. I had
serious.
to change my network.
Everybody.
So I had to change my complete network, and that was scary to me because I had the same OBGYN since I moved to Chicago in 2005.
Yeah.
So now it's 2020 and I'm going to someone else. Thank God I was very intentional though about finding a Black OBGYN because of shared experiences that we've heard with mortality rates in us giving birth.
Yeah.
And I don't want to die yet.
Right.
So
not ready.
I'm not ready.
Right.
So, but that process, you know, thank God that I was able to find a Black OBGYN who I love and trust. The fertility specialist was not, but she was great. It was what it was. I ended up doing a couple of fertility specialists, and you know, so the balloon test, there's another test where they check for your follicles, which basically sees how many follicles you have, because follicles develop the eggs. And so throughout some of these tests is where they were discovering the fibroids, the multiple fibroids that I have.
I got you.
And I wish somebody I just wish, and I guess had I been trying, then I would have been more proactive earlier. But because I wasn't, it was so directly related to trying to conceive for me that
you couldn't have done it preemptively
years
ago.
No, but I wish someone would have said, hey, I saw in your chart that you were diagnosed with a fibroid back in 2013. It's 2015. Let's check to see if it got bigger.
Or where are we
with that? And I'm, you know, going to the doctor regularly, regular PAPs. And so if I'm not getting an abnormal PAP, then it's nothing's fine. Everything's fine.
Absolutely.
So it just was something that was not talked about, discovered, thought about until I was trying to conceive. And then it's like, oh, you have all these fibroids, you know? And so that kind of led us in a different direction in terms of needing support for fertility.
Got it. Find out that you need some help, a little bit of support with fertility. Let's talk about what that looks like. When I say that, I mean, what were the options provided to you? Was there any hope for a natural pregnancy? How was your fertility specialist supportive at this time? And just run the entire gambit.
Right. Okay, so all the part of the testing that was done, so the balloon test, the follicle test, then I went to someone who basically was like, let's test to make sure your tubes aren't blocked. Because that could be a thing too. So they run the test, the tubes are fine.
The HSG? Yeah.
And I was basically told by that doctor, because I'm kind of bouncing around. I'm looking for a doctor at this point.
Okay.
And I'm getting references from people, but I'm kind of checking all the opinions of all these different people, both fertility specialists and OBGYNs. So the one who did the tube test to make sure my tubes were clear brought up the fact that maybe the fibroids are blocking the sperm from reaching and implanting and doing what you needed to do. So that was the first time where it was just like, okay, well, maybe IVF is the only option. Not the only option, but you could still try naturally, but it may or may not happen, or you can do IVF and have a better chance.
This is you thinking this through?
No, this is what I was
presented
told.
To you. Okay.
Yes, this is what's presented to me.
Got it.
And because like the clock is ticking. Let's just be like my clock is ticking. Right. It's still a beautiful clock. It's hanging on the line. That thing is ticking.
But it's working. It's working overtime.
It's working. It's ticking. So I'm married now. I'm like, okay, I'm at this point, just get me to the end goal.
Right.
So if IVF is the better option, that would happen quicker. Because it's like I could keep trying for a year, or I could just go into IVF and start the process. So I decided to do that.
Okay. As many women do.
Mm-hmm.
It's very common, a very common process. And that's another thing that I wish that we as a society would normalize.
I feel like, at least from what I know, more non-Black women
Absolutely.
have the access and the experience
And the means
to get it done. And are told early on about family planning and about egg freezing and like all this other stuff that it's not presented to us as an option really. And so anyway, that's a whole nother
and
thing.
it's infuriating, and we can go off on that tangent later, but it is a tangent.
Yeah. Yeah. So decided to move forward with IVF. Found my OBGYN, whom I love, and I have my fertility specialist. So remember, I did the balloon test in the uterus.
Yes.
They said there were no fibroids there. So I start a cycle of IVF. And there are checkpoints when you start the hormones, like there are checkpoints along the way. And midway through, my hormones weren't balancing out.
Yeah.
It wasn't balancing out. So it's what they consider a failed cycle. So I went through one cycle of IVF and it didn't work. And I won't say luckily or unluckily, but my personal preference, some people get so far as to like getting their embryo and all that stuff and then having the pregnancy not go through.
So it's kind of fortunate.
Yeah, I'm just glad that it was caught early on.
Right. So you don't miss out on an opportunity to use those embryos. And I'm probably using horrible terminology because I'm not as familiar.
Yeah.
But I get it.
And it's still so disappointing because you're taking these shots. I'm not a needle person at all.
In your stomach, right?
In your stomach.
Yeah.
And then you're also getting blood tests every week. So I'm like the person that's like this, like I can't even look.
You're a pincushion.
Yes. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Oh, like, yes. Yes.
Pricks. Yeah.
Pricks. All the time, constantly. Daily, weekly. So the failed cycle prompted another ultrasound.
Okay.
In that ultrasound, they told me I did have fibroids in my uterus.
After you've been told that you did not.
Yes.
After having that entire process with the balloon and it's uncomfortable and it was
painful, actually. I almost passed out. So now I have them in my uterus. So my mind is like, well, did the IVF cause this? Like, I just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And, the questions you ask are being answered enough, but not in a way that I could really understand.
Mm.
And I will say, not my OBGYN, but the fertility specialist, it's very clinical. Like,
submucosal things like telling you things that,
and there's no emotion connected to it. Like they're kind of running, like you come in, you get your test, you leave. It's like a assembly line almost.
Right.
But I had a good experience with them.
Okay.
But it just wasn't warm.
Yeah.
I'll say. So it was just very matter of fact. And this is what it is. So you have to have surgery to get the fibroids removed from your uterus before we can move forward. So that was kind of a no-brainer for me. Fine, I'll have surgery. I've never had surgery before in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Never been under anesthesia. So I'm like nervous about that. And it's a myomectomy.
Yeah.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
So I didn't have any cuts or incisions.
They just went in.
They just went in vaginally. So healing time is a week or two.
Yeah.
It's a outpatient. So my husband takes me, we leave same day. Once I wake up and come to, and it was fine. They removed fibroids from inside of my uterus.
How many, if you don't mind me asking?
I think there were 2.
Okay.
2 inside. I go back to my fertility specialist. Okay, ready, cycle number 2. They do an ultrasound. Now, mind you, this is after surgery and the healing. I go back and they're like, no, we still see some. So I'm like, well, how can this be?
She was in there.
Like she was inside taking them out. And the response I got was that sometimes there are some hidden that you can't see. So when you take them out, the other ones might pop up.
Like they were hiding.
They were hiding. The fertility specialist is like, we cannot move forward until you get the fibroids removed from your uterus, because they can't do any, they don't want to put a fetus in my uterus with fibroids in there. And I did have a friend who had, you know, an experience where she had a fibroid and she got pregnant, and the hormones from pregnancy feed the fibroid.
Yeah.
So then the fibroid's growing at the same rate of the baby, and then
yeah.
it was premature. So I get that. So it's like, fuck. Are we cursing? Sorry. Okay.
It's
so I'm like, man, I have to have a whole other surgery. So I scheduled that one. Doc goes in. She removes the one she sees. She gives me a photo of the inside of my uterus, not an ultrasound, a photo of the inside. It's all cleaned out. And she's like, take this to your fertility specialist. Everything's gone. I got stuff that might have even looked like it could have been a fibroid. It's out.
Okay.
The uterus is clean, ready to go. Okay. I go through my healing period, 2 weeks. I go back to the fertility specialist. She's like, there's still something in there. And it looks like it could be scar tissue. I tell my OBGYN, and she's like, it could just be fluid. So at this point, it's like...
But nobody knows for sure?
Nobody knows for sure what it is. Or a polyp. It could be a polyp. It could be scar tissue. It could be fluid. So I'm like, I need a second opinion, or a third, because I'm talking to fertility specialist who's saying we can't move forward with anything in there.
Right.
I'm talking to my OBGYN who's saying it could be fluid. Let's give it some time to see if it goes away, or it could be a polyp, which isn't a big deal. And I don't know what to think. So then I go to Raby Institute. I have a lot of friends that have gone there.
Yeah.
They speak very highly of them, and I know that they have a combination of Western and holistic approaches.
Yeah.
So I go to Raby Institute, and I'm told verbatim, under no circumstance should you get a third surgery. Now, mind you, my first surgery was in September. The second one was in October. So now we're early November, and I'm being told I need a third surgery.
Right.
Raby Institute says under no circumstance.
Which I understand.
I understand
I totally get that.
I get that part.
Yeah.
OBGYN is saying it could clear up. Fertility specialist is saying, well, until then, there's nothing that can be done. What I heard from like Raby Institute was that, you know, women who are getting pregnant don't have perfect uteruses.
Right.
There's stuff in there all the time.
Right.
So just have them do it. The fertility specialists, they don't have that leisure for margin of error.
Right, because they're focused on, I have to get you pregnant.
A successful
this
pregnancy.
is how it has to look.
Yes.
Right.
So I get both sides of it.
I do too.
But as a consumer,
A human being, right.
I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
But I've had 2 surgeries, and I'm in too deep. And I'm like, well, I went to the Raby Institute, and they said under no circumstance should I get a third surgery. And she's like, what, you won't get pregnant? And it was just that matter of
factly, no thinking about the human who has to go through this process or what it could do to your body. And there's no in between. That's what's crazy.
Right.
There's no, this is a quandary. I can imagine how difficult this might be. Let's work together to find whatever.
None
it's
of that.
Just, your uterus needs to be perfect.
It needs to be perfect.
Okay.
I'm sitting there. This is right before Thanksgiving. And I'm like, do I get it? Do I not? I think I talked to you. I talked to my mom, my husband. Like, just which way do we go?
Right.
And it's kind of like, what I decided was I'll just get the third surgery. And it did end up being scar tissue.
Oh, okay.
So I had to get the scar tissue clipped out, which fertility specialist,
she was fine with that.
She was right.
That was right.
Like, so
right.
got that done. I go back after my third surgery in 4 months. So now it's December.
Feels excessive.
It does, and scary. And I'm also thinking, like, you know, would a non-Black person get this same recommendation to have 3 surgeries in 4 months? I don't know. I'm scared because of what I know happens in the medical community when it comes to Black women and the lack of proper information and care. And so that's in my head.
Because we know for a fact that even with fibroids, Black women are recommended to have hysterectomy at the first sign of a fibroid. Far more cases than non-Black women, and namely white women. Women of color are not advised, are advised to have hysterectomies where white women are not. So that your fear is justified because we know what happens. We've seen what happened to Serena Williams. We've seen all of these stories at this point.
If I'm like, if Serena can almost have a problem, then do I stand a chance?
Exactly.
Had the third surgery, went back. Uterus was clear and clean and fine to move forward, to the point that the nurses, like, they were clapping for me because
that's sweet.
This was a process. September
I remember.
Through December. And you keep getting surgery, which is fucking surgery. Like, I've never had surgery before.
And back to back.
Back to back. And so once December hit, I got cleared and it was good to go. And I was ready to start my second cycle of IVF.
Okay.
And then I got COVID. It's not funny, but that's what happened.